The Dust Widow was barely a ship. Once a mid-range hauler used for short-route cargo runs, it now creaked like an old animal in its sleep. One engine thrummed at half capacity, the other growled intermittently like it was reconsidering its purpose. The crew called her Widow with a kind of weary affection, as if naming her for what she was bound to become. She drifted at the edge of council-controlled space, somewhere between the known lanes and the cold places where star maps stopped caring. No one flew this far unless they had something to hide or nothing left to lose. The Dust Widow had both. On the bridge, faint yellow warning lights blinked at irregular intervals. Navigation was running on manual override, jury-rigged from old mining software. Life support whined quietly in the walls. Duct tape and prayer held most of it together. Captain Cora Nell stood at the viewport, arms crossed, watching the frozen moon spin below them. "That's not a mining operation," she muttered. Behind her, Rico tapped at the console with 2 fingers and a broken stylus. He was the ship's comms officer, though calling him that implied there was ever more than one person on the job. "No registry ping. It's dead." "Been dead a long time, probably." He squinted. "Except for that." Cora turned. "What?" "Radiation. Trickle leak. Contained, mostly. But that's not what bothers me." He tapped a side panel, bringing up the scan logs. Encrypted transmissions. Not recent, not local. Backscatter pulses, laser tight. "Look like council SIGs to you?" She stared at the telemetry. Her jaw tightened. Where are they going? Everywhere. Central Command. Periphery Command. Even a couple of bounce relays that went dark last year. This moon was talking to everyone, and then it wasn't. The silence between them thickened. From the corridor, someone shouted. Heavy boots thumped against the grated floor as Taishi, the ship's quartermaster and sometime engineer, strode in holding a crowbar and a bundle of wires. "Okay, which genius bypassed the mag converter with medical tubing? I nearly broke my neck in the forward head." Rico didn't look up. "Probably you. You're the engineer." Taishi slammed the crowbar onto the nearest console with a metallic crack. "I'm the quartermaster. I pretend to be the engineer. Don't blur the distinction." Cora pointed to the display. "Get Bones up here. We've got something." 20 minutes later, the full crew stood around the bridge, if 4 people could be called a crew. Cora, Rico, Taishi, and Bones. Bones wasn't a doctor, not really. He'd once patched up a rebel commander with a shoelace and a cauterizer during a siege on Helen's Cradle. Since then, everyone just called him Bones, and he never corrected them. They stared at the scan overlay like it might blink. "Cloning facility," Bones said flatly. "Council make 2. That's 2nd-gen gene cradle architecture under that ice. See that arc shape? That's a reinforcement dome. Military grade. Cryo-stabilization towers. Probably hydro-linked nutrient tunnels. Maybe even full behavioral programming suites." Taishi shook her head. "On a dead moon?" Bones nodded. "Perfect place to hide it. Too cold for settlement. Too far from trade lanes. They didn't want anyone stumbling onto this." Cora exhaled slowly, eyes locked on the display. "What were they building?" "No way to be sure," Bones said. "But look, there. Biosignal clusters. Faint but still ticking. You don't keep the lights on for nothing." "Shock troops," Rico said quietly. "They're making soldiers." "Made," Taishi said. Past tense. "Place looks shut down." "Facilities like this don't get shut down," Bones said. "They get buried. Or repurposed." Rico shifted in his seat. "We ping the Alliance. Someone else can handle it." Cora was already shaking her head. "I've tried. I sent the data packet to 3 different relay points. No acknowledgement." Taishi frowned. "They're not answering us?" "They're not answering anyone," Rico added. "Alliance channels are blackout in this region. Probably redirected everything toward the front lines. They're getting hammered in the Serrani corridor." "So we wait?" Bones asked. Rico checked the power draw logs. "We don't have enough fuel to wait more than 3 days. The widow's leaking mass, and we're still riding on an unbalanced reactor. Council doesn't know we're here, Taishi said. We could just go. Cut the engines, drift into deep space until we hit a lane, ping a patrol, get rescued, sell the data. Let someone with real guns handle this. And if no one does? Bones asked. No one answered. Outside the viewport, the moon spun slowly. Its surface a cracked white mirror pocked with ancient impact scars. The faintest glimmer of an antenna, like a frozen dagger, peeked through a layer of frost near the equator. Cora turned from the window. We don't know what's in there. Not exactly. But we know what it's for. Rico swallowed. Yeah. And we know no one else is coming. Bones met her eyes. It's not our job. No, Cora agreed. It's not. She leaned forward, hands gripping the back of Rico's chair. But we found it. We know what it is. If they finish building whatever's in there, they'll use it on rebel worlds. Colonies. Kids. Rico's voice dropped. You think I don't know that? Taishi paced the room, then stopped. We go in, we die. Simple as that. This ship can't fight. We barely have a hull, let alone firepower. That place probably has drones, lockdown traps, remote AI security. Cora nodded. Probably. Then why? Taiki began. Because if we don't, Cora said, voice calm, nobody will. There was silence. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just tired, aching silence. Rico closed his eyes. Bones nodded slowly. Cora turned back to the window. The facility blinked on the scan display like a heartbeat. Maybe it was a death trap. Maybe it was abandoned. Maybe it was full of half-grown monsters waiting to be unleashed. None of it changed the truth. The Council had buried something under the ice, and they were the only ones who knew it was there. If not us, Cora whispered, then who? They put it to a vote. That wasn't standard procedure on the Dust Widow, mostly because the crew rarely agreed on anything beyond ration allocation, and which systems not to touch unless absolutely necessary. But Cora insisted. If they were going to die, she wanted it to be something they chose. The vote came back, 2 in favor, 1 against, 1 abstained. I abstain every time something stupid is proposed, Taiki muttered, arms crossed. Which is often. I need a system. Bones cast the only no vote. He didn't explain himself. He didn't need to. Cora nodded once, like the weight of command settled harder when shared. They got to work. First came the weapons. The Dust Widow didn't have much. An old mining laser they'd retrofitted into a hull buster, some directional charges they used to break asteroids, and 1 rail launcher repurposed from a meteor defense rig. It had a 12-degree firing arc and a habit of jamming when the humidity got too high. Cora raided their emergency cells for power. They shut down gravity in 2 decks and cannibalized the heating coils from the secondary galley. Rico rewired their distress beacon into a remote detonation trigger. He had to disable 3 safety protocols to do it. If we survive this, he said, we're never passing inspection again. We weren't before, Taiki replied. While they worked, things cracked beneath the surface. Bones started drinking again, quietly. Not enough to make a scene, just enough to smell it on his breath when he muttered instructions or patched together one of the boarding suits. Taishi refused to finish wiring the explosives until someone explained how they were getting in and out. We're planning to land on a top-secret Council black site using a half-dead cargo ship and 3 half-sober maniacs. Someone needs to spell out Step 2. Rico did the math 4 times and still didn't believe it. The approach vector had to be precise, within 0.01% tolerance, or they'd overheat the engines and announce themselves before even touching down. We're flying into a shielded zone blind on minimal power with no margin for error. Cora leaned over the console, eyes locked on the moon. Then don't make any. On the last night before launch, Rico sat alone in the mess, staring into a cup of cold coffee that had outlived 2 wars and a peace conference. Taiki found him there, hands wrapped around it like it might warm something still left inside. "You know," he said without looking up, "I used to be a teacher." Taishi raised a brow. "What, like kids?" He nodded. "Back on Vornet 5, before the burnings. Before they pulled funding and started conscripting anyone with half a degree to run logistics for the war machine. I taught literature." Taiki slid into the seat across from him. "You don't look like a poet." "I'm not. But I can quote 17 variations of dying for a cause from 6 different species." He took a sip. "I just don't think we're supposed to die like this." Taishi didn't reply. They launched at 5:12 local ship time. The approach was rough, course corrections every 5 seconds, ice particles hammering the hull like angry fists. Cora piloted manually, her eyes never blinking, hands trembling only when they left the controls. They landed in a jagged ravine a few hundred meters from the facility, shielded from aerial sensors by ice walls and their own failing heat signature. Bones and Taiki moved first, laying a thin trail of sensor scramblers as they approached the surface hatch. Rico stayed back with Cora, monitoring comms and prepping the Widow's railgun for extraction cover. The outer dome was scarred with age but functional. Bones cracked the panel with tools more appropriate for ship repair than infiltration. He'd done this before. He didn't talk about where. Inside, the facility was dark. Not lifeless, just asleep. Red emergency lights cast everything in blood-colored silhouettes. The hallways were smooth, metallic, and wide, built for moving heavy cargo or personnel en masse. No windows, no names, just numbers and arrows in blocky council font. They split into pairs. Cora and Bones headed for the central power core. Taiki and Rico took the lower decks, where the cloning chambers likely were. The deeper they went, the more obvious it became. This wasn't abandoned. It was incomplete. There were no finished units, no fully formed soldiers in cryopods, but the infrastructure was there. Thousands of pod cradles, fully automated growth tanks, stasis fields, surgical tables, brain mapping interfaces. This place was ready to become a factory, a warforge. And it was close. Too close. At the central core, Bones began rigging explosives while Cora rewired the coolant feeds to overload. They worked in silence. She finally spoke when he sliced open his palm on an exposed edge and didn't flinch. "Why'd you vote no?" Bones wrapped his hand in cloth. "Because I've seen this before. People like us, trying to stop something too big. It never ends clean." "We weren't meant to win," she said. "Then why bother?" She looked at the cooling tower. Because someone has to. Down below, Taiki and Rico were planting charges when they tripped a motion sensor, one not logged in the facility schematics. Sirens didn't wail, lights didn't flash, but a silent alert pulsed out into the deep systems. And something responded. A dozen active defense drones booted up in the maintenance bays. They emerged from recessed walls like beetles, armored and efficient, weapons systems warming silently. The Widow's crew didn't have time to regroup. The drones moved fast. Rico took the first hit, his left leg vaporized at the knee as he shoved Taichi behind a support pillar. He screamed once, then fell silent, gritting his teeth as Taiki hauled him into cover and returned fire with a repurposed cutting torch. "Go!" he barked. "Get to the others!" "Shut up!" she snapped, firing another blast. "I'm not leaving you!" "You are. Because if we don't finish this, none of this matters." Above, Cora and Bones got the alert. Cora cursed. Bones handed her the remote and turned back to finish the sequence. "You go. I'll catch up." "Bones." "Don't argue. Just finish it." She did. She sprinted down the corridor, bullets of light snapping past her as drones closed in. She fired blind, her sidearm overheating, her breath ragged in her lungs. She found Taishi dragging Rico toward the emergency lift. Together they made it to the surface. Bones didn't. They saw the charge flash through the storm behind them as they launched. The explosion fractured the sky. Even from orbit, it was unmistakable, an expanding bloom of white fire beneath the moon's icy surface, brief and brutal, then gone. The facility hadn't just been damaged. It had been vaporized. A crater hundreds of meters wide opened across the southern hemisphere, belching up frozen debris and structural wreckage into the thin atmosphere. No distress signal. No survivors from below. No reinforcements scrambled. The Council would likely never acknowledge that the base existed, but somewhere, in one of its secure archives, a redacted file would be stamped lost. They would tell no one. They would learn nothing. But the galaxy would. Inside the failing hull of the Dust Widow, Cora lay strapped to a rusted medcot, blood soaking through the right side of her shirt. Her ribs had cracked on impact during the launch, and the shuttle's manual landing system had failed entirely, smashing the pod into a jagged ice shelf and leaving their ship groaning against a cliffside. She was conscious barely. Taichi paced nearby, limping from a fragment wound to the thigh. "Engines are done," she said, not looking at Cora. "Wiring slagged. Reactors bleeding fuel. We're not going anywhere." Cora didn't answer at first. She blinked slowly, her breathing shallow. "Rico?" Taichi's jaw clenched. Still out, but breathing. They were the only ones left now. Bones had stayed behind. Rico had given his leg for the mission. Cora had nearly died twice. Yet here they were, sitting in the shattered husk of a dead freighter on a nameless ice moon. Taichi reached into her coat and pulled out a small, battered data crystal. It glowed faintly blue. "What's that?" Cora asked, her voice dry and brittle. "Rico's last job before he passed out. He uploaded everything we pulled, schematics, bioprocessing data, the comm logs, the whole goddamn plan. He bundled it and rigged the comm beacon to fire it off across the grid. Every resistance relay, every pirate signal station, every half-dead repeater node in Council space." Cora let out a breath. "It got through?" Taichi nodded. "We launched the signal 30 minutes ago." Cora looked up at the cracked ceiling, where a soft blue light flickered. She smiled faintly. "Then it was worth it." For a long time, they didn't speak. The wind howled against the Widow's hull. Somewhere, outside the ship, a section of outer plating finally gave way and collapsed into the ice with a groaning screech. Cora closed her eyes again, not from pain this time, but because she could. The message spread faster than anyone expected. At first, the Council didn't even notice. Their monitoring networks were still patchy, still paranoid after the coordinated strikes of the last uprising wave. But the data slipped through anyway, via smuggler beacons, through cargo drones and backwater terminals, through forgotten satellite chains and scavenger mesh feeds. The transmission was simple. Raw footage, quiet commentary, a timestamp, and at the end, 6 names: Cora Nell, Taichi Varn, Rico Talon, Bones, real name unknown, and 2 listed as fallen before operation, Yaren Hess and Mech Varlo, long-dead crewmates of the Dust Widow, whose ID tags were used in decoy transmissions. The message ended with a single line of text. They were no one, but they stopped an army. Resistance networks began replaying the footage on loop. On frontier worlds and rebel holdouts, old terminals lit up for the first time in months. Teachers played the clip in classrooms. Soldiers watched it in bunkers. On loyalist worlds, some civilians downloaded it in secret and passed it around on data wafers marked as maintenance reports. The Council called it propaganda. But no one cared what the Council called anything anymore. People began calling it the Ice Mission. The phrase spread with myth-like speed, in hushed tones and open song, in graffiti and memorial tablets, on Rebel Fleet banners and in recruiting halls. Not because the Dust Widow crew had destroyed some massive installation, not because they'd been elite commandos or revolutionaries or heroes, but because they hadn't been. They had been broken, tired, half-mad with exhaustion and grief, and they'd done it anyway. A symbol was born, not of perfection, not of glory, but of the raw, stubborn refusal to let evil go unanswered. On the 27th day after the transmission, a scavenger crew from the ship Grey Lantern stumbled across the crash site. The Widow's hull was barely intact, half buried in snow, but the beacon was still transmitting. Inside, they found Tyche, alive but unconscious. Cora had died the night before. Rico never woke up. They buried them on the moon, beneath stones carved from the crater's edge. The Grey Lantern took Tyche to a rebel med bay on the edge of the Sorn Belt, where she spent the next 3 months in recovery. When offered a chance to return to active duty, she refused. Not out of fear, but because her fight had ended. She chose to speak instead. She told the story of the Dust Widow, of 4 people who shouldn't have made a difference, who didn't have the right tools or the right training or the right timing, who were told they didn't matter. She told them anyway, and across the galaxy people listened. Years later, long after the Council's grip had crumbled, after treaties had been signed and new flags raised, a monument was carved into an asteroid near the moon where the Dust Widow fell. The asteroid had no name, no colony, no settlement, just the monument and the stars above it. It was made of hull metal, scavenged from wrecked ships, bolted together, weathered by space. A single column stood in its center, ringed by 6 jagged stones, each inscribed with the names from the transmission. The column bore no symbol of state, no banner, no anthem, just an engraving, roughly etched, unpolished, but clear. They were no one, and they changed everything.